What are we witnessing? What is this, besides the obvious, the latest attempt on President Trump's life? It certainly feels like the convulsions of an establishment that is desperate to keep its stranglehold on power. For more on that, I want to turn to a guy who's written the book on the subject. It's called American Leviathan, The Birth of the Administrative State and Progressive Authoritarianism. Ned Ryun is about as smart of a political observer that you're going to find anywhere. He's the founder and CEO of American Majority, and he joins us now. Ned, good to have you with us, sir.
Yeah, great to be with you, Vince. Appreciate it.
The birth of the administrative state and progressive authoritarianism. What are we witnessing right now in the United States?
So we're witnessing the end of about 100-year, I would argue, failed experiment, Vince, in which the progressive movement, which began in this country late 1800s, early 1900s, just decided that they were done with the Constitution. The whole movement was about destroying the moral and political authority of the U.S. Constitution, destroying the machinery of the Republic, and rejecting it wholesale, which, again, is ironic that we're talking about this today, the signing of the Constitution. This is Constitution Day, September 17th.
Yeah.
But they rejected it wholesale, and in the place of a republic decided, well, for us to have greater advance, greater progress, to really achieve the perfection of mankind in this world, which is what they believe, Vince, we're going to put together an administrative state filled with an unelected bureaucracy of a so-called educated elite. And the only separation they believed in, Vince, was separation of that administrative state from any political ability. And then really the vision was that those unelected bureaucrats would do the governing of this country. And people will find that maybe a bit shocking. What about our constitutional republic? I think that's been a bit of an illusion in regards to how D.C. has worked for decades. Well, the problem then becomes, Vince, when the great outsider shows up on January of 2017, Donald J. Trump, and still thinks we're operating under a constitutional republic and says, I'm the duly elected president of the United States. I'm the one that decides policy. And they said, we don't think so. We think we decide. And really, if you were to peel everything away, Vince, everything that's happened really over the last 10 years between D.C. and you can call it the permanent D.C., Washington, D.C., has been about the conflict about who decides and a clash of two very different governing philosophies.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples of what you're talking about. One of them is they've normalized this idea, for instance, that the Department of Justice operates outside of the executive branch, that it has no accountability to the President of the United States. It's supposed to be independent. The President shouldn't have any role whatsoever in the Department of Justice. Well, no, the founders didn't create an additional branch of government called the Department of Justice. It's under the President. Or when Trump would question generals, they acted like he was violating some sort of sacred principle that the generals are supposed to be more impressive and more important than he is. Or when he made demands of NATO, they thought they were acting like he was doing something that is forbidden. The President of the United States demanding that NATO countries live up to their obligations? What is that?
Again, it comes down to they think they are the ones that decide. And the President of the United States really has served more as I would argue, mask, Vince. It has to be something of a masquerade to give the illusion that somehow elections matter, when in fact elections come and go, administrations come and go, the state remains. But no, I mean, this is the crazy part that we're experiencing right now, that you come down to the head of the executive branch, and a unified theory that the executive branch answers to is the President of the United States. And you're seeing a lot of people go, well, no, that's not how it works. Well, actually, that's how the founders intended that it would work. And the administrative state actors said, we don't think so. And the crazy part, too, about what's taking place, what they want to do is consolidate power. The progressives did inside the administrative state. They wanted the executive, the legislative, and the judicial because they believed consolidated power was what was needed for progress. Again, completely antithetical to the founders and believing in diffusion of power, which, by the way, is the greatest protector of our natural rights, the diffusion of power, not the Bill of Rights. Mm-hmm. And here we are in which these bureaucrats are thinking they are the ones that govern, and Donald Trump saying, no, I'm the one that governs. And so when you see them responding so vociferously, calling him Hitler, calling him an existential threat to democracy, it's really their version of democracy, which has nothing to do with representative democracy. Yeah. And he's an existential threat because they know this, and I think Donald Trump has now figured this out, that if a powerful executive were coming to the executive branch of his own volition and with the political courage, he could devolve the administrative state in 4 years. a lot of it at least.
Yes, and restore the power to the people. That's
Yes.
so. What this is throughout history, we've seen this same game over and over, which is totalitarian regimes will dress up their raw exertions of power in the language of democracy. This is why you have the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is North Korea, controlled by Kim Jong-un. It's not democratic. It's not a republic. Or when you have the People's Republic of China, it's controlled by the commies. It's not a republic in any meaningful sense. This is always the language that they wield as they consolidate totalitarian power.
And I would point out with all those countries, they have a Bill of Rights. But there are really no rights. There are no natural inherent rights. And our founders put together a rights-based government. Rights come from God. That to secure those rights, governments are instituted among men. The greatest threat to our natural inherent rights is, again, this consolidated power in which government pulls it together and is able to abuse our natural inherent rights. The founders knew that. They didn't trust imperfect human nature. So I kind of detail a lot of the history and the philosophy behind the progressives, behind the administrative state, behind the rejection of the Constitution, and then ultimately where did we get to today, where we have this massive, sprawling leviathan of bureaucracy filled with these unelected bureaucrats who, I got to tell you, Vince, they are not governing. First of all, they shouldn't be governing. They have taken powers unconstitutionally. They are dictating to the American people, this is what we think is best for you, and if you don't like it, you dirty little peasants, we're going to compel you and force you to submit. Has nothing to do with the Constitution or a constitutional republic. And I have to tell you, Vince, studying the history of it, it is deeply un-American in its approach to governing.
Well, they've also, over the same time frame that you just laid out, Ned Ryun, over the last century, they built in all sorts of protections from the American people, holding them accountable. So, in American history, we called it civil service reform, but the concept was that if you're a government employee, there should be no way for the American people to fire you. It can't happen.
So this is the problem. Again, they wanted to separate out the administrative state, but then it begs a question, Vince. How do the American people have redress for their grievances if they're really being governed by unelected bureaucrats that are separated out from any accountability? And I think Americans are waking up to this, realizing something is wrong in D.C., but they haven't quite put their finger on it. That's why I wrote this book, to explain to them in as concise a way as possible, here's what's going on. And I would argue one of the fundamental questions for the 2024 elections is the administrative state. What are we to do with this administrative state? And I hope enough of the American people realize not what we want. Powerful executive getting back in. The Supreme Court has really started to step up. This summer they made two very important decisions, Chevron deference.
Yep.
And then also saying the SEC tribunal, Securities and Exchange, and a lot of departments and agencies have their own tribunals that 90% of the time rule in favor of those departments and agencies. The Supreme Court said, first of all, undermines an independent judiciary, which was very important to the founders, and also annihilates the idea of the Seventh Amendment, right to trial by jury. So between a powerful executive stepping in, the Supreme Court stepping up, and I think more of the American people understanding what's taking place and saying this is not legitimate, the administrative state, I think you might start to see some momentum in the right direction and saying, we would like to have a republic back in place and really, quite frankly, a restoration of all of our rights.
Yeah, I know. With so much going wrong in government, sometimes you lose sight of the fact that there were a lot of very good decisions made by the Supreme Court this last term that did restore power to the people in a very meaningful way, which is which is a very, very big deal. It's wild that this is the world we're living in. Do you think, as you assess the current political environment, your book, American Leviathan, and all of the things you're assessing about these unelected bureaucrats and the power of the establishment, is this why you get a guy like Dick Cheney endorsing Kamala Harris? Is that what leads to that?
100%. I mean, first of all, it's kind of the neocon globalist warmongers of the world unite.
Yeah.
Vince, and let's face it, Darth Vader endorsing the empire, shocker. But I make the point in the book, the last two presidents to really say we reject the premise of this administrative state before Trump, Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon. And then every president since then, including George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, really accepted the legitimacy of the administrative state. And the real problem with it was the fact that they weren't running it, right? They didn't have a problem with saying this is, bureaucracy and unelected bureaucrats governing is a problem. They just wanted to be able to run it.
Yeah.
And then Donald J. Trump shows up and goes, I reject the premise. That's why they consider him an existential threat. That's why they call him Hitler and all these other things, because at the end of the day, he is an existential threat to the status quo of permanent D.C., the administrative state. And they know that he has figured out a few things, Vince. He has figured out what the problem is. If he can get a few things right, if he wins, and then gets a few things right, like transition personnel and the head of PPO, and sends in the right decision makers to the various departments and agencies to implement his vision to deconstruct the administrative state, game on.
Do you think he has the right people around him now? You know, and among the people that I'm thinking of as I ask you that question, J.D. Vance as his running mate.
Yep.
Does he reject the premise? He has people like Tulsi Gabbard and RFK supporting the transition. They seem to reject the premise. Do you think he's got the right people joining the fight?
I think he's starting to build out the team that all reject the premise that this is legitimate, the administrative state. I think he's got to make sure he gets transition personnel right, because you have to get the plum book for every administration, Vince, called about 5,000 positions, maybe 300, 400, 500 important decision makers that have to be decided by transition personnel and then the head of PPO. He's got to nail those two positions. And if he gets those two positions right, which I have to tell you, he didn't quite get them right the first time around until last year when he got Johnny McEntee to run PPO. If he can get those right, as well as a team around him that fundamentally agrees that we reject the premise, we're moving in the right direction.
How do you assess, and this is when I talk to you, I typically ask you the state of the election in terms of the mechanics of it. I saw some, I guess, some good early indicators that Pennsylvania ballots are looking good for Republicans. How do you assess things right now, Ned?
The real numbers, I think we've had this conversation, Vince. I look at polls as very nice. You know, I enjoy a good one. I'm a political nerd, but the real numbers are the ballot universes and partisan registration. And, you know, we've talked about Arizona, but Republicans, last time I checked, 75,000 ballot advantage for Republicans over Democrats in Arizona, over 250,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats in Arizona. That's significantly better than 2020. Pennsylvania, Democrats have lost about 300 and some thousand in their partisan registration advantage, and their ballot requests are down about 300,000 versus 2020, and Republicans are up significantly. So in the real numbers that count, and I remind you, Pennsylvania was only won by Biden by about 80,000 votes. In the numbers that count, significantly better for Trump in 2024 than they were in 2020.
So there's energy. The energy is out there for
this. There's energy, but and we're 49 days out. There's energy. The numbers are right, and now it comes down to who's going to have the better chase and early vote program to get these votes in as quickly as possible. And I've been encouraging people then play the game by the rules. You might not like the rules, but the rules are if there's absentee ballots dropping in Pennsylvania 50 days out in early voting, take advantage of that. The economics of early voting, you're going to save Trump a ton of money by voting early.
Yeah.
Because if you vote early, it's about $10 to $12 per vote. Wait a couple weeks, about 20. If you wait until Election Day, it could cost $100 for your vote. Get out and vote early. Get the votes in so that coming into Election Day, Republicans typically dominate on Election Day. And if Trump is anywhere near the lead in the absentee ballot and early voting numbers coming into Election Day, he will win.
I just want to talk about the economics of what you just said so people understand. And I think I understand what you're saying, so correct me if I'm wrong. But if I vote early, my address is yanked from the universe of places where they need to send political mailers. So the political mail ends to your home if you actually cast your ballot.
Mail ends, door knocks end, phone calls end, texts end, digital will probably end. If you turn your vote in, if you're using a sophisticated data approach like I am, like Trump, your name will be removed as the universe continues to shrink and to shrink. And Vince, a really good rule of thumb is in the absentee ballot chase, you want to get 80% plus of those ballots in, and you're going to give yourself a really good chance of winning. But it's all data driven. You vote, your name drops off the list. And I tell people all the time, the chase is a series of targeted harassments. If you want the beatings to end, return your ballot or go vote early, you'll get off the list.
And you're going to save the Trump campaign a lot of money so they can focus those resources elsewhere.
Yeah,
and Ned
groups
Ryan.
like me, you'll save us a ton of money.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Well, that's why I'm going to be at the Fairfax Government Center, 8 o'clock, first day, first hour for Virginia's early vote this
Fantastic.
Friday. It's going to be awesome. I'm inviting everybody else out there. I'll have the WMAL car out there. You'll see me. Our plan is to have coffee and donuts, so it'll be a great time. Hey, Ned Ryan, thank you very much. Congratulations on the new book, American Leviathan, out now. Get a hold of it. Thank you, Ned.
Thanks, Vince. I appreciate it.
Of course, always good to talk.